I am pleased to welcome Andy Tucker, who is Castle's Director of Policy, and he is going to lead our learning today. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. As Emily mentioned, I am Andy Tucker. I am the Director of Policy here at Castle, and I'm excited to welcome you to this webinar and to talk about, the first couple of webinars have been closer to the ground. We're going to move up a level to a little bit higher elevation and talk about the policies and other conditions that help support the academic integration of social and emotional learning. So with that, we're going to do our intentional welcome. And our inclusive welcome is about, I'd like you to think about this. And you can write it down on a piece of paper, on a sticky note that you have on your desk, anything like that, just something to consider. Think of a supportive policy or condition that allows for you, if you're in a classroom, or if you work with classroom teachers, to incorporate SEL into the classroom. Is it a building level policy or condition, maybe a district level policy condition, a state level policy or condition? And think about how is it supported. So give you a couple of minutes to think about this and just gather your thoughts. Get into the room. Okay, hopefully you were able to think of a policy or a condition that allows for you to incorporate SEL into your classroom and into the academic instruction there, or into a classroom that you support. So that will get us started for today. We're going to be talking about these policies and conditions. So as a bit of a recap, and you've probably seen this graphic before. There are a number of things that we need to make sure that SEL is integrated effectively into classroom instruction. And those are student-centered approaches in a supportive classroom environment. We know that we need to align SEL and academic objectives, and we know that we need to have explicit SEL instruction. It's what we call our three-legged stool. And you can see that. And so what we're going to talk about today is really, and what we've talked about through this entire series, is the integration of SEL and instruction. We also know that there are supportive conditions, and that we have our 10 supportive conditions that we need to have for indicators of success. And one of those is indeed SEL is integrated with academic instruction. So this series of webinars has focused on those on that particular indicator of systemic SEL. So as we think about policies, and we think about what policies can support SEL and academic integration, we're going to share some examples. So at the federal level, we know that there are federal policies that support SEL and academic instruction. The first is for example, is the Title IV-A program and the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. That funding that is a formula funding that comes from the federal government to your districts and then trickles down into the schools, into the classrooms. That funding specifically is a policy that can support SEL and academic instruction. One of the allowable uses for that funding is SEL. Another option is a grant program called the Education, Innovation, and Research Grant Program. An example of that is a project that is based out of National University in Illinois, with implementation sites in San Antonio Independent School District, Washoe County School District, and in New York City Public Schools, that focuses on comparing the implementation of two versions of an SEL curriculum, one with academic integration aspects embedded and one without. It includes professional learning on academic integration. So this grant program, these what we call EIR, Education, Innovation, and Research Grant Program, the EIR grants really are they focus on research and on building those inclusive environments and on integrating academics, integrating SEL into academic programs. There are also state level ways, that state policies that can support SEL and academic integration. The first are SEL standards. We know, and we're going to focus, by the way, in this webinar, partially on Massachusetts and what they're doing with their SEL standards and how they're incorporating SEL and integrating SEL into their academic content. SEL standards can do that, especially when they're integrated into the content area standards. And that, again, that's what we're going to focus on today. Another way that you can do it in state level work is through teacher preparation standards that include specific instruction on incorporating SEL into academic content. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Today, we'll also hear from a district, Boston Public Schools, and we'll talk about how Boston Public Schools is incorporating what the state of Massachusetts has done. And what they have done, and what, along with Boston Public Schools, and what all districts can do, is they can make intentional connections between core content standards, content instruction, and SEL. Many districts around our country do that. They do professional learning and provide teachers with numerous resources in order to build those really intentional connections between core content standards and SEL. And finally, we know in schools, there can be really explicit expectations to incorporate SEL into classroom lessons. So one of the things that you'll see on the next slide is we talked about how states and here at Castle, we oversee the Collaborating States Initiative, where we work very closely with states and state education agencies like Massachusetts, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. Like to build systemic SEL in their states. And we work with them on state standards and other things. What this map shows you is it shows you the states that have standalone K-12 SEL standards. Those are in orange, and also with an orange dot. We'll see that there's some states that have academic integration that is accomplished through crosswalks. We'll see that some of these SEL crosswalks are in math and ELA. And you can also see that where SEL is specifically integrated into academic standards in math or ELA. So that's what this map shows you. You'll see that, as you can see here, the majority of states in our country have done one of these things. On the next slide, let's learn about an example. So an example is Nebraska. In Nebraska, what they have done is they have social, emotional, and academic development as an overarching foundational aspect of their standards, and in this particular case, it's English language arts. So you'll see in the circle that overarches the standards themselves, social, emotional, and academic development is a foundational aspect of their standards. On the next slide, we'll see that in Colorado, what they have done is they have literally integrated SEL into academic standards. They call it their Colorado Essential Skills, but the essential skills in Colorado are a reflection of social and emotional learning. So you'll see specifically the connection made for, quote, collaborating effectively as group members or leaders who listen actively and respectfully. They pose thoughtful questions and acknowledge the ideas of others, and they contribute ideas to further groups' attainment of an objective. So those come from the Colorado essential skill of accurately recognizing one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behaviors, and appropriately expressing a range of emotions to communicate personal ideas and needs. So in Colorado, they've integrated SEL into their academic standards. On the next slide, we'll learn about in Minnesota. Minnesota has a slightly different approach. What they've done is they have a crosswalk. So they go and they pull from the Minnesota academic standards, and they show how in different grade bands students can meet can incorporate social and emotional learning competencies, such as taking turns and sharing with others in collaboration and collaborative problems. So you'll see the academic standards where those are broken down. Finally, what you'll see in the state of Oregon, and what they've been able to do in the state of Oregon, is they have actually incorporated SEL into their pre-service teacher educator preparation program standards. So it is an expectation for their teachers, uh, for their teacher preparation programs or education preparation programs. It is an expectation that they will instruct their pre-service teachers in how to incorporate SEL into their academic instruction. So those are a number of ways that SEL is incorporated. You can specifically integrate SEL into academic instruction via policy and via state level policy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk with a couple of experts in this area. And I'm thrilled to bring bring into the conversation Colleen Galvin Labbe, who is the lead social, emotional, and academic development and instructional coach in the Office of Health and Wellness in Boston Public Schools. Colleen has been an educator for over 20 years as a classroom teacher, reading specialist, and instructional coach, working with educators to align SEL practices in and out of school. She has held teacher leadership roles in her district and state, most recently as a member of the Safe and Supportive Schools Commission, and has presented at national conferences focusing on integrating SEL and instruction. Her work around co-creating think spaces in classroom has been highlighted by the Boston Foundation and the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative. She believes that when we approach SEL through an equity lens, it has the power to create learning environments where students feel a sense of belonging, develop personal identities, and are empowered to become change makers. Colleen is dedicated to advancing practices that promote transformative SEL in school communities. Also joining us today is Kristen McKinnon. Kristen is the Assistant Director of the Office of Student and Family Support at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. During her nearly 20 years at DESE, that's what they call it, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Massachusetts is DESE. So during her nearly 20 years at DESE, Kristen has worked to support efforts to advance DESE's strategic priority of supporting students' social and emotional learning, health, and safety. Kristen oversees the educational stability team that supports students who are homeless in foster care, migrants, or from military families, and the health team, including sexuality education and HIV, STD, and pregnancy prevention, and behavioral health and mental health. She oversaw the review, revision, and adoption of the 2023 Comprehensive Health and Physical Education Framework. Colleen and Kristen, welcome, and thanks for being here today. So let's start our conversation today with Colleen and Kristen. And the first question I'm going to pose to you, Kristen, if that's okay, and we kind of alluded to it in your introduction. The state strategic plan in Massachusetts includes health, safety, and SEL in your new educational vision and goals. Can you talk about how this impacts the work that you do to support schools and districts with SEL implementation, especially as it's integrated into academics?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. I think we started with social and emotional learning, health and safety as part of our strategic plan. We've gone deeper and built upon that in DESE's new educational vision, which really promotes kind of all aspects of SEL. So that sort of opportunity for students to attain academic knowledge and skills, for them to understand and value themselves, to understand and value others, and to be in and experience the world around them. So to have relevant learning opportunities. So I think those sort of components of our new educational vision really are SEL embodied. And so it really helps guide all the work that we do, and gives us all those opportunities to be able to say, look, these are all integrated parts of how we get to these outcomes for students so that they can be successful. So I think having them all kind of in the same sentence, so to speak, really gives gravitas to SEL as one of the key levers for us in promoting student outcomes. So attendance, health, well-being, and safety, and those academic knowledge and skills that we want all of our students to attain by the end of their public education.
Colleen, how is that implemented at the district level?
So thank you. It is so nice to be here. So it helps us immensely at the district level, right? In several different ways. So I'm in the Office of Health and Wellness. And so part of my larger team includes health and PE. And the work that Kristen has led for DESE in the new 2023 frameworks explicitly names the the 5 SEL competencies. It's literally explicitly built in. And that is some of the work that my larger team focuses on. I'm part of the SEL and instruction team. So we lead Tier 1 SEL in Boston. And just the fact that so for our professional learning and our instructional coaching strategies in schools, this is one of our biggest focus areas, is integrating SEL into academic content areas. We always start with the Massachusetts frameworks. So especially in ELA, we're supporting an equitable literacy focus and, in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The SEL competencies are so visible in the Massachusetts frameworks. And we actually start with the fact that it's a guiding principle. So guiding principle number 10 is, we had this in mind when we created these standards. We are focusing on the 5 SEL competencies. It really leads into all of the work that we do district-wide and in schools especially, that we work with closely.
Thanks for that, Colleen. Yeah, I mean, so what we're seeing is that there's great alignment between what's happening at the state level down to the district level. To that end, Kristen, Colleen was talking about the guiding principles in your state standards, and SEL is central in the guiding principles. So can you talk to us a little bit about how that came about? How you've operationalized it, what types of professional learning you might offer to districts to help with that implementation. And Colleen, please just jump in wherever it makes sense to just how you then operationalize what they have done at the state level. So Kristen, sorry, if you need me to restate that, I'm happy to.
No, I think I got it. So yeah, I think we started this integration work by developing those guiding principles in the ELA and the math frameworks, which were the first to be revised post Common Core, in that kind of like they were created and then revised again. So pretty early on, those guiding principles were included in those frameworks, I think, as a signal that we can't do the work of education. You can't students need to develop these skills. I think, Colleen alluded to the guiding principle 8 in our English language arts framework, and it really outlines, I think. So it reads, students should practice recognizing aspects of themselves in text. So self-awareness, it names it, and it talks about an example of what that looks like in ELA. And I think our guiding principles in all of our frameworks are underlying philosophies on how those content area programs and courses of studies should be developed and played out. So all of them now also include guiding principles around equity and cultural responsiveness. They include guiding principles around SEL. And I think every one of our frameworks, every content area now has an SEL guiding principle. And then, as Colleen mentioned, once we got to the place where we were ready to revise the comprehensive health and physical education standards, which has been a long time coming, we really used the opportunity to integrate in those standards and articulate the specific learning goals. So not only is there a guiding principle around SEL in that framework, but also the standards really call out explicitly the knowledge and skills that we want our students to know and be able to use that are our social and emotional competencies. I don't know if I answered the whole question, Andy, but
that was great. Colleen, so when you've seen these, and we can go to comprehensive health and PE or ELA or any of them, what types of professional learning, how do you support your district, your schools, and the operationalizing?
Sure. So schools, first of all, we offer district-wide PD on this very thing. And again, for my team, our team on SEL and instruction, we focus on first ELA because it is such a focus to support the district-wide focus on equitable literacy, kind of beginning around reading and science of reading and things like that. So what this helps us with, because again, we start with the Massachusetts frameworks to name, number one, like these are not separate things. You cannot provide access to curriculum and support student learning without building in SEL and incorporating it and aligning it. So number one, it elevates the importance of it and at the state level. And number two, like you mentioned earlier, Andy, it helps make intentional connections. So RPD is we build in practice time. Teachers and other educators and school staff can engage in really sitting down and looking at the frameworks, highlighting where they see SEL visible, and walking through the process of what SEL skills do students need to be able to now access this content. So it really engages folks in very thoughtful conversations, which makes academic standards much more real, right? When it becomes a process of, okay, if students need to practice these SEL skills to access the academic standards, then what kind of opportunities am I going to provide throughout the day to practice these SEL skills, right? So it actually it starts small and it builds it out into instruction in general and embedding SEL in general. It really, our coaching model, we work with schools for a full year. And so this is deep work. And again, the Massachusetts frameworks help us lead that work. We have tools, certainly. I'll say one more thing. We have built our tools around this very subject and the fact that using the 5 SEL competencies in the Massachusetts frameworks, we can also look at those reflection questions to create SEL objectives. So we have district-wide tools on our website that everyone I think has access to now to support also the how to do this, right? So obviously coaching is our strategy and we support teachers in doing that, but we have created tools around this. The other thing, Kristen, that you mentioned is the focus on equity and culturally responsive and affirming teaching. So in Boston, that's what we center everything on, right? So culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. So as part of our work around our professional learning, we also use the resources that you have created as a result of working with Zaretta Hammond. So you actually just make our life a lot easier. But again, it is so important to be able to show often, right? I'm a former classroom teacher. Often teachers think like, oh, it's one more thing to do, right? Oh, now I have to add SEL to this, or I have to add culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. The work that is happening at the state level helps us show that in fact, these things are very much intertwined. You really can't do one without the other if you want to effectively teach all students.
Yeah.
I saw you came off mute, so jump in, go.
Yeah, no, thanks, Colleen, for that. Sort of, we are partners, right, with our districts. And so, districts in Massachusetts have local control. And so districts can pick curricula that they choose. DESE does not tell districts what curricula and resources they need to use, but we provide lots of tools and resources to try and not have every district reinvent the wheel. And so I will say, we started with those guiding principles in all of our frameworks, and we got lots of feedback that said, we need more. What are those like specific standards? What are the things like, what's a grade level appropriate demonstration of self-awareness? Like, what would that look like? And so I know other states have done SEL competencies or learning standards that are separate. Our commissioner at the time of our relaunch of the revision of the comprehensive health and physical education framework really wanted us to embed those into health and physical education. He felt very strongly that districts didn't need a separate SEL framework, that we should embed it with other appropriate content areas. And this was one way to really flesh them out. And so I wanted to say that, but also that, you know, each of our content areas at DESE has sort of a team that supports the work of actually sort of translating and adopting those frameworks. And so through ambassadors networks, through the supports and resources that our curriculum and instruction team provides, we're able to work with districts to flesh out additional resources like those that Colleen has talked about, so that they can adapt them for their own districts. They can really translate, like, what does this guiding principle mean for world languages? What does it mean for the arts? What does it mean for history, social sciences? And then how do you really dig in with your curriculum and see how you integrate that? I will say we have a lot more we could do with that, but we are sort of seeding that work through some of our grant opportunities. And Andy, this might be a question you ask next, but I think we've had a number of grant opportunities over the last several years using our Title IV money to be able to support schools and districts to really look at what are our high quality instructional materials and how can we build in and integrate SEL and development of SEL competencies into that existing curricula. So an example of that, we partnered with Harkins Consulting and have been implementing a curriculum called Connect Science, which is, may have been talked about at a previous webinar that Castle put on, but that really took high quality science materials and said, you can't do science in 4th grade without teaching self-management. Because when you give kids those wires and batteries, there's burning that happens, there's, you know, whatever. And so they plugged in explicit lessons on self-management before doing the lesson on circuitry, right? And so that curriculum really provides a nice blueprint for how we can do academic integration with SEL. And our grants have supported either implementation of that curriculum or the development of one's own in a particular district. So taking your own high quality curricular materials and looking for those opportunities to weave in social and emotional learning. And I think we've done that in a way that actually sort of fits the definition of transformative SEL, and that we use the strategy of service learning, where students are really looking in their communities, thinking about what needs and problems exist, using their content knowledge for math or ELA or science or health and physical education, and explicitly learning those SEL competencies while they're addressing one of those problems. So we've funded probably 30 or so districts to look at that and to develop their own units of study that do that work of integration.
And where did that money come from?
So initially we used Title IV funds for that. And we are now using Stronger Connections grant funds for that. So we just awarded, I think we awarded 15 new grants for districts to dig in and do some more of that work.
That's fantastic. And so for those on the call that may not be aware, that Title IV-A, federal funds directly out of ESEA, and then Stronger Connections is from BISCA, from the Building Stronger Communities Act. So a large amount, $1 billion of federal funds that came out to support student safety and school safety. So thanks, that's super helpful. You mentioned a minute ago the need to, if you're going to do science, you gotta teach students some self-management skills so that they don't hurt themselves. I'm not sure that everybody always considers that as being an SEL lesson and teaching self-management, but indeed it is, right? I mean, doing things safely is managing yourself and managing your behaviors and things like that. I think that's a great example. Colleen, I'm wondering if you can share any other really great examples you've seen at the school classroom level of really strong integration of SEL into academics.
Yeah, so a couple of things actually, Kristen, while you were talking. So at the school level, when we work with teams of teachers and other adult teams and the principal, really around embedding SEL practices into the classroom, across the classroom, and like I mentioned before, providing opportunities to practice these new skills, including self-management. That's a huge one for all of us, right? Because it also involves setting goals, right? So this is, pre-K through grown-ups. These skills are life skills that are essential. I think for us, because we also focus on transformative SEL, the really beautiful things we have seen, especially focusing on ELA in most of the schools that it's just a great jumping off point, is around rich and diverse texts. So enabling texts and really digging in with teachers to talk about what is the SEL theme of this text that is aligned with transformative SEL, which is of course aligned with culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. And how can we construct an SEL goal or an SEL learning objective around this that focuses on things like identity, agency, belonging, collaborative problem solving, and curiosity? We've seen some beautiful work around this. And then it also helps the teacher think a different way about how they're approaching the lesson. Again, ensuring that these things are not separate, it is very intertwined. We're not talking about a separate curriculum. We're talking about what's happening within, in order to meet academic learning standards. What are the SEL skills that you need? The other thing that I'm thinking about is the focus curriculum in Boston. So you mentioned curriculum. All of our curriculum is, chosen by Boston, and schools use different curricula for different grade levels. But the focus on pre-K has really elevated transformative SEL and embedded SEL objectives within the curriculum in Boston for K0 all the way through grade 2. And I think it's a great example, Kristen, you mentioned that work is also kind of reciprocal, because you're also then elevating the work that Boston is doing around that early childhood curriculum.
Yeah, we have. So Jesse has partnered with some of the folks that supported the work in Boston. And we're also replicating that in other districts, again, through grant money, through that Stronger Connections grant. And we also use some ESSER money to fund some of that, to really look at how play is so important for us, particularly for our younger students, although, many would argue for all of our students. But yeah, so we have taken some of those aspects of that curriculum and again, sort of built play as one of the methods for developing social and emotional competencies, but also academic learning at the early grades. That's a great example, yeah.
The hearing of the partnership that exists between DESE and Boston Public Schools and the other districts in the state of Massachusetts, it's really inspiring. And for those on the call who may not have the strong connection with their state agency, they're there to help, and they're there to help support and to provide guidance and things like that, and vice versa. If you're a state agency person and you haven't tried to learn about, and I'm sure you have, but I mean, haven't tried to learn about what is actually happening on the ground as a result of the policies that you put forth, having that partnership is just so mutually beneficial and highly, highly encouraged. I'm also super excited to hear, Kristen, that the DESE has really leveraged some of the funding opportunities that are coming from federal policy decisions to help to fund some of this work, because really that's what those dollars are intended to do, and they can trickle all the way down into the district level. So thanks for sharing all of those things. I'm wondering, Colleen, if you can answer another question, because you've talked about how you mentioned earlier that some people feel like that this is an additional responsibility, right? So I'm curious what barriers you may have overcome as you have worked to integrate SEL into academics.
That's a great question. Thank you. So number one would be just that, right? So teachers are already doing too many things, making 8 million decisions a day, and are responsible for lots of things and people. So one kind of assumption is that, when we talk about integrating SEL into academics, is that it sounds like it's this big additional heavy thing, right? And sometimes it can be an additional thing. If we're talking about a separate SEL curriculum, our work focuses on integration. And so that is one way that we overcome it, is exactly through what we mentioned earlier around, here's a professional learning, let's talk for 90 minutes and let me show you where SEL is built into our Massachusetts frameworks. You automatically see folks like, oh, okay. The other, barrier, I guess, or, assumption is that I don't know how to do this, or I shouldn't say assumption. It's a feeling of, I'm not sure what this looks like. So maybe not that I don't know how to do this, but more like, I don't really know what it looks like. So again, when we go to the standards and we use the academic frameworks to ground ourselves, highlight, where do you see self-awareness? Where do you see self-management? And let's, visit your classroom and highlight all the things you're already doing, because teachers are already doing it. So it really is such an asset-based approach, and it puts folks at ease. Like, you're already doing this. Let's find out where we can make it stronger, or build on what you're already doing to make it more explicit and more meaningful and more authentic. And that has been the beauty of this, the integrating SEL and having the Massachusetts frameworks to lean on has really been the biggest success. It shows folks it's not separate. You're doing this. It is expected. And it is very much intertwined, and not this other whole new thing that we all have to learn.
Right, you're already teaching your fourth graders to be safe and to practice that self-management. That is an example of just one of many, and one aspect of teaching self-management. Yeah, I mean that's a perfect. There's so much that people already do, and that's why academic integration of SEL is it can be so beneficial. So along those lines, Kristen, I'm wondering if you can talk briefly, because we're approaching the end of our conversation, unfortunately, but if you can talk briefly about what kind of outcomes maybe you've seen, just in maybe just bright spots, whatever you've seen by this focus in Massachusetts, and the guiding principles on really incorporating SEL into everything that everyone does in the academic standards.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of what we were just talking about is really the bright spot, right? That it's seen much more as an integral part of the work that we're doing in public schools. And I think there are openings now to make it feel like it's not that add-on, that it's actually going to help us get to where we want to go, right? If we're focused on these things, kids want to come to school because they're feeling known and valued. They're feeling like they can understand that, and they can manage their relationships with their peers, because we're teaching some of those like social and relationship skills kinds of things. When we do this in transformative SEL, they're feeling empowered. They're feeling like they have like a say. They can, there's like a point to their learning, right? So I think there's just only been sort of benefits to that. I do think there's always more work to do. And I think there's more places where we can at DESE be supportive in sort of helping people not have to reinvent that wheel, like I said before, right? So with the new health and physical education standards, I think one of the things we did is we coded those standards to make sure that people could see the SEL is embedded there. We wanted PE people to see themselves. We wanted our health educators to see that they're there. And we wanted our social and emotional competencies to be sort of front and center and known. And that they're all sort of braided together, right? But to that last point about SEL and calling it out, I think one of the things as we start to roll out and help support adoption of those new frameworks is to look at these other opportunities of where, all right, where these pre-K to SE or social emotional coded standards live, how are those embedded in your ELA content? How are those part of what you're trying to do with math or science? And help to like point those out for our educators to draw those lines that Colleen has done. Boston has already done, some other districts have, but they've had to do that on their own to like figure it out. I think now that we have them in the new framework, I think we can start to help do that and sort of uplift what schools have already done, districts have already done, as one opportunity, right? To keep reaffirming that message that this isn't an add-on. To do science well, you need to help support your kids to learn those self-management skills or those kinds of things. So I don't know if that was really, I think it's a highlight. I think it's a really good result of what we've done.
Great. And Colleen got excited about it and was clapping. So I'm wondering, Colleen, if you want to explain why you got so excited about what Kristen was saying there.
Well, I'm always interested in hearing about the opportunities or the what next. So I loved that Kristen was thinking about that, right? So that we have these things in place from our, Department of Education is amazing, and support around helping us do the work of integrating it and deepening that work and growing it is very exciting to me always. So I'll be calling Kristen, I'm sure.
Keep that collaboration going. All right, I have one final question, and then we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. This kind of integration of SEL and academics at the state level down to the district level, and this sort of collaboration between the two is relatively infrequent, unfortunately. For example, we only have 6 states that have integrated SEL into their math or ELA standards. Why do you think this is? And what advice would you give to states and or districts, maybe from each of your perspectives, that have not embarked meaningfully on connecting SEL and academics? Maybe we'll start with Kristen.
I can say, I think it's sort of this is how schools have operated forever and ever, right? Math is math, ELA is ELA, science is science. And, even those opportunities like the focus curriculum, right? Where we're integrating all of that. I think it happens way more at the lower grades, but not as much anymore, right? Because we have tests now that people are, sort of focused on. So we keep them separate, I think, and we forget about the fact that what our guiding principle for ELA says, like for students to really enjoy reading, they need to see themselves in text, right? They need to sort of understand, they need to perspective take, they need to do all the things to read and to convey a message as a result of that. So I think our teachers actually see these connections much more clearly. But when we pull things up to the policy level, we create these Massachusetts has 9 content areas. We have frameworks for all 9 areas. We sort of, in a policy way, separate all of those things. And so I think the thread of having these guiding principles has given us that opportunity to draw those connections. I think for ELA too, we did it literacy across the content areas, right? So we've done it in some places, but I think there's just more to do around SEL. And I think just one last thing I'll say, I think we get a little territorial too. If I'm the ELA or math teacher, this is I know how to do it. This is how I've done it forever. And so I think where we can show them this is what you already do, but let's just name it explicitly. You're also teaching this and take credit for it, right? You're doing it anyway. So I think some of it's just education and awareness. That's what.
Anything to add, Colleen?
I think you nailed it. I also think the thing that I heard you say around teachers know how important these skills are, or most teachers know this. I think that gets lost in translation often at the policy level. The teacher voice should be a part of policy, period, right? So at every level, number one. And I think also nationally, there are misconceptions around what SEL is, never mind how to integrate it, right? So there's also that really does indicate continued education and discussion and collaboration between policymakers and educators is just so vitally important, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about self-awareness, for example, no one is going to dispute that we have to in schools have students be able to name their feelings, how they're feeling, and perhaps strategies to manage strong feelings. No one's going to say that we shouldn't be doing that in schools, but the big bucket umbrella of SEL in general, or even self-awareness, needs discussion. And when it's integrated, those things happen very naturally. And that's where the state, in Massachusetts anyway, does help us. But having teacher voice, you guys already know this, in every aspect of policy is what I think really does inform the change that needs to continuously happen.
Yeah, I think we see that teacher voice is so vital. Parent, educator voice, parent voice, student voice. I mean, just hearing from our stakeholders and the folks that are the ones that both implement and receive the instruction is so vital. All right, we have one
community partners also, out of school time partners, huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. We had the community partners. I think we probably have community partners listening on this call. Maybe we'll ask this quick question because I did see this come through. How can community partners get more involved with this, given that we're talking really about academic integration, but how can they be partners in the work that we're talking about here?
I will name, go ahead, go for it.
Go ahead, Colleen.
So some of the work that Boston has done over the years through a grant, the Partnership for SEL Initiative, was around exactly this. It was around, which community partners work with students from different schools in, after school time or before school time. And we actually worked with them, and I can share a report to take a look that the Wallace Foundation put together. They collected data on how important it was to work with kids, the folks that are working with children in out of school time and before school time, before or after school programs, with some of the educators in the schools to create a common SEL language was amazing. It could be, if a school has a mindful moment every day, from transitioning from recess into the classroom, having a conversation with the folks that are working with kids outside of school to say, oh, this is the language we use. We have, a mindful moment to transition kids from outside to inside. They can very easily incorporate that in out of school time programs. And it really had a positive impact. So those things do happen in pockets. And, also like what's working for you all here in out of school time. Having those conversations helps create an alignment around SEL language and student learning. So that was, I'm going to send you.
An amazing example and yes, as much alignment as we can have in between out of school time programs and schools, it only benefits the kids that receive services from both. Last question. I think we've spoken on.
Can I just put a plug in on that one? So we're also in our 21st Century Community Learning Centers programming. So another federal funding source. SEL is one of those priorities. So similarly, at the state level, we're saying, okay, if you're doing 21st century community learning out of school time during the summer, how are you like embedding opportunities to do social and emotional competency development, and how are you connecting that to how the school does it? So kind of like at the state level, what Colleen talked about.
Got it. Again, Massachusetts is doing a great job embedding using federal policy and federal funding sources to really help with SEL across the system and across the state. Last question, I think we can answer this one quickly because I think we've touched on it, but just wanted to make sure there wasn't a little bit more there. Can you talk about why it's important or how you have ensured that standards and the work that you're doing around academic standards and SEL integration is culturally relevant, culturally specific, yeah, and culturally sustaining, to use the words that you're using, Colleen? Just maybe in 30 seconds or less for each of you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so again, for us, and Castle, really has helped lead that work for us around a transformative SEL approach. So yes, we incorporate the SEL competencies, but the approach to it is around focusing on student identity, agency, right? Student voice and choice, how to create a sense of belonging in the classroom. That includes diverse perspectives, and incorporating all of these things. How are we teaching collaborative problem solving, right? I'm naming all of the components of transformative SEL. And how do we lead with curiosity? Teachers are excellent at that. And how are we looking and learning at our students and from our students on how it is they're learning? Because kids are naturally curious. So that's also that reciprocal relationship, and is very much centered around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices.
And I'll say from the beginning with the comprehensive health and physical education standards, as we developed those, we had a panel of 50 plus educators, community partners, helping us to develop those resources. And then we did an equity audit on those before we put the draft out for public comment. So we worked with an equity partner to look at them, to give us feedback on where they didn't feel like they were representative of all students and all identities. So made some changes to the standards before they went out. And then I think in terms of implementation, I think we're thinking about the training that we do and making sure that we're providing opportunities for people to do equity pauses as they're looking at standards and translating those into what it means. So for me as Kristen, white woman, what self-management looks like might be very different for the children sitting in front of me. And so we have those built into our trainings to make sure that educators, as they're digging into what those competencies look like, they're sort of weighing for bias and making sure they're thinking about how to be delivering and holding expectations on those standards in an equitable, culturally responsive and sustaining way.
Kristen, Colleen, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly rich conversation. I think everything was fantastic. I think I was most excited about just the fact that you all seem to just, you appreciate each other and you appreciate each other, the work that each organization does to support kids and to support the teachers that are working every day with the students there in Massachusetts. Thank you so much for your willingness to be here today and to share your the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you. So some key takeaways for everyone on the call. There is federal, state, and local policies that can and do support academic integration. And the collaboration between your state agency and your districts is incredibly important and can be very, very helpful. There are a broad range of policies that can ensure the integration of SEL and academic content. We've heard about a number of them, from federal to state to district to down to the school level. And close alignment between state policy and district level implementation can drive the fidelity of implementation and ultimately drive excellent student outcomes, which is, I think, what we're all here for.